Thank you everybody for coming out. I'm Dr. Jade Dittaro. I actually live in Kelowna, BC, Canada. Family medicine trained. I'm a recent certificate in the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine, member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So my focus is on preventative medicine, reversing, halting, preventing chronic disease. I am super passionate not only about human health, but planetary health and animal health. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and have my little 3-year-old, who is my inspiration, eavesdropping. So thanks for being here.
Verena. Verena, you are muted, just so you know.
Yes, sorry about that. Since I have to be on my phone, I couldn't find the unmute button, but here I am. Sorry about that. So my name's Verena Rossa. I am an MD by background. I practiced as a psychiatrist for several years before I went back to university to get a master's degree in public health. So my current focus is on research around the intersection between the food system, the environment, human health from a population perspective, and the health of the environment and animals. So my contribution tonight will be more from a systems level perspective rather than focusing on the individual, but I hope that that provides some valuable insights to people as well. And I'm really excited to be speaking to and with so many of you.
Great, thank you both. Okay, so we do have a very long list of questions that were submitted in advance, and we're also going to try to get to as many of your questions in the chat. So we are going to do our very best to get through as many questions as we possibly can. I will say that in all the webinars that the three of us have done together, we've never been able to get through all of the questions. So I don't necessarily have the expectation that we'll be able to get to every single question, but we really hope that we can get to as many of them as possible and just have a great time of conversation together tonight. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question that was submitted in advance. And that is, we know dairy is the most concentrated form of, as well as the #1 source of saturated fat in the standard American diet. Why is saturated fat problematic? And Jade, I think I'll pass that to you first.
Sounds good. Thank you. So I work predominantly in a hospital, and one of the wards I work on is the cardiac ward. And whenever I see people after their bypass surgery, there's usually videos that they have to watch before they're discharged. And one of the #1 things that is said in that video is you need to avoid saturated fat if you want this bypass to be successful. So why? Well, saturated fat can clog arteries, to put it quite simply. I could get into the nitty-gritty, but I'm not going to. So saturated fat is linked with heart disease. That's the #1 killer in the United States. So if you think about it, saturated fat, heavy foods, why would we eat them? We don't need it in our diet, and it is predominantly in animal-based products, and cheese is one of the most concentrated ones, and cheese is one of the most loved foods. So you definitely would want to avoid that, just from a heart disease perspective. Something people don't know that I would like to share is that saturated fat is actually linked with diabetes. Most people associate diabetes with eating excess amount of sugar, but fat can go into the cell and totally mess with the ability for the cell to take up insulin. You get something called insulin resistance, which then leads to diabetes. And so there's a direct link there. So those are two prime examples of diseases that are rampant in our society today that could be lessened significantly simply by avoiding one of the major sources of saturated fat, which is dairy.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to just move us right along here. Another question that was submitted in advance. Many people don't realize whey is a waste product of the cheese industry. Why is whey problematic? And a similar question that came in advance is, are there antibiotics or hormones in whey that is used then for other products such as protein powder?
So first of all, you have to think of it on a global scale. So it's interesting that there's all these protein powders out there that's like way. And if you look at stuff like even the taco seasoning I bought the other day, I was like, oh, there was whey in it. Like, why is it in there? It's just a brilliant marketing gimmick, really, from the dairy industry to be like, this is a waste product, and how can we, monetize it and make money off of it? And they're like, oh, well, yeah, it can make you big and strong and get muscle gains. Well, that big and strong was actually meant for a calf, not for a human. And we're not supposed to have the gains that a calf is supposed to get into a full cow. That's wild. And so my problem with it is that it's very much industry that has led sorry, she wants, yeah. So anyway, that's whey in a nutshell. The other thing too is just it can be a bit of an allergen as well. So a lot of people, should be avoiding anything that contains lactose or whey in general, just because of their sensitivity to it. But long story short, to me, it's more that it's an industry driven thing. Verena, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think I've read some brilliant articles on the way that's really been marketing driven first and foremost, because if you can make money off of a waste product, then why not?
So I see that someone asked in the chat, I thought whey acts as a stabilizer in many food products. Do either of you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it can, but so can many other natural plant-based things. And again, we should be looking more towards foods that don't contain these items in general, any stabilizer. One of the best diets out there, the one that I will always advocate for or recommend to my patients, is something that's whole food, where you don't have an ingredient list and you're eating things like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and whatnot. So legumes, you don't need a stabilizer in any of those products.
Okay. Another question that was submitted in advance is something that I don't necessarily think that we'll be able to answer. What is the top selling plant-based milk in the marketplace? So I don't know. Let us know in the chat if you happen to know what the top selling plant-based milk is right now. I know that oat milk is very popular right now, and that was shown in the poll that we took at the beginning. So possibly oat milk. But yeah, let us know in the chat if you know anything about that. Let's see here. Another
Ali,
question. Yes.
sorry, can I just put a plug out for soy milk? Because a lot of people are afraid of soy. Soy has a lot of positive benefits. If you're comparing head to head the plant-based milks, especially for children who are weaned from breastfeeding, soy milk is actually most on par with their nutritional needs. So soy sometimes gets a bad rap, but from like a protein and nutritional content, I would actually say go soy.
Mm-hmm.
I would say go soy too. It's my absolute favorite, and I have it all the time. Awesome. Okay. Jade, this one might go to you. Is there anything that you can speak to with regard to the connection between consuming dairy products and the development of cancer?
So one cancer in particular that's highlighted really well in the literature actually is prostate cancer. So they've done studies with health professionals where they've looked at the consumption of dairy and the incidence of prostate cancer, and there is a direct correlation. And then someone named Dr. Dean Ornish, who is a guru in the lifestyle medicine community, actually did studies on men with early prostate cancer. And so they compared those who just did the standard thing for surveillance and those that they actually went to a whole food plant-based diet. So it doesn't look at dairy directly, but just in general, what it looked to was if you made lifestyle modifications, which included a whole food plant-based diet, your prostate cancer didn't actually progress. And for some of them, the markers regressed. So that's prostate cancer in general. The other thing I will say is that dairy contains hormone, right? Most of us are leery of soy because we're worried about the phytoestrogens, but dairy often comes from already pregnant cows. The only way to make money in the industry is to continually impregnate the cows so that as soon as they're starting to wean their milk supply, then they have another calf and then they can have breast milk produced for that calf, right? They're the same as us. It's breast milk. So that pregnant cow has an excess surge of hormone in them as they're growing a baby cow, a fetus. And so there is some concern that that excess hormone can increase risk of hormonally linked cancers. So that's the other piece.
Okay, thanks. Verena, I'm coming to you with the next question that was submitted in advance, and that's about research. So the question was, research that sheds a positive light on dairy products is often funded by the National Dairy Council and or the United States Department of Agriculture. Why is industry funded research an issue, and how does it lead to consumer confusion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I love critical questions like that. Let me just point out that in and of itself, no human adventure is ever free of bias because we all come to things with our values and ideologies. So what we often imagine is that there's these neutral, unbiased scientists who then get paid and bought by the industry to generate certain positive outcomes in research. But what we often forget is that scientists already come to the table with their own kind of ideas and values. So for instance, the other day I read an article, and I'm just going to quote the researcher here, who said, "I'm not concerned that my work may turn into promotional material for the dairy industry. If they can use our data in a positive way to encourage more consumption of dairy in populations that don't consume enough, then that's fine by me because I believe in the health benefits of dairy," right? So you already have those researchers, and then they're of course not critical when it comes to receiving funding by the industry, because that way they can promote and increase their research around the topic. So it's not like, we have this conspiracy theory where the industry is like holding up a gun to the researcher and saying you can only publish this if it's positive. They're actually often not that involved, but they will find the people who are more willing to produce results that are helpful to the industry. And then the other side is no one is forced or required to publish their findings. So if we find something negative or that doesn't support the argument we want to make, then we can just keep that hidden, right? It doesn't have to go out. So we can only produce and publish and disseminate the findings that we think is in our interest. And the third point I want to highlight is that most people never read the scientific source and scientific paper. We usually go right to mass media outlets, and the industry has very heavy influence on what people actually publish and put out there. So there's different layers to that question, and none of the layers are very straightforward and easy. But yeah, it's always critical to look at where does the funding come from, where does the researcher work, and why does media highlight certain things more than others.
Great, thanks, Verena. And I will say that Maya has been posting some links in the chat, and I would definitely encourage everyone to, we don't want to lose you right now, so stay with us here in the webinar, but maybe open the links so that you kind of just can maybe reference them later. There's been some really helpful and great links shared in the chat so far. I want to get to a question that came in a couple minutes ago in the chat. What is an alternative dairy yogurt that contains probiotics good for gut health? So I don't know, Jade, do you have any specific recommendations of plant-based yogurt that you use?
So there are plenty of options in the store, and a lot of them have probiotic added in. You can get almond or coconut based ones. Now you can even make your own with coconut milk from a can at home and some probiotic capsules. Here's what I want you to know though, is that if you eat a good plant variety in your diet with a lot of insoluble and soluble fiber, don't sweat it about probiotics. Your gut bacteria are your probiotics, and you just need to feed the beast. You need to feed them. And so all of these people, and myself included, I used to think like I had to have yogurt in order to have probiotics. That's simply not the case. So our gut bacteria, our gut microbiome is such a powerful thing. It's a really big emerging area of medicine. And what we've realized is just plant variety, regardless of what your diet is, omnivore, vegetarian, vegan, is the secret to success when it comes to probiotics. But if you insist, you can easily Google a couple recipes on making your own coconut yogurt, or you can find ones at the store and just read a label, whatever kind of suits your palate. Be aware a lot of them have lots of added sugar.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Rowdy dropped into the chat, that fiber is so important for your gut health, just as Jade was speaking to. Yeah, our gut microbiome feed on fiber, so fueling your body with fiber is the way to go. And we know that fiber is found in plants.
Exclusively in plants. No animal
Exclusively in
product
plants.
contains fiber. Yeah.
Yeah, and let me
Yes.
just point out, because so many people, we often get asked the question about nutrient deficiencies when you go on a plant-based diet. The number one deficiency in a Western diet is usually fiber, but no one talks about it. It's not very sexy.
All right. Oh, and I see that there's some other, fermented food options being dropped in the chat, which is great. Okay, let's see where we are here with our list of questions. Don't forget, you can drop your questions in the chat as well if you have any, as I'm working through the list of questions that were submitted in advance. Okay, I have the next question for us, I think is a common question. So I'm really excited to hear one or both of you speak about this. And that is that research shows countries where milk consumption is the highest actually have the greatest fracture rates. Can you comment on the connection between dairy consumption and strong bones? And we also had another question get submitted related. Someone said, why does my son's doctor tell us at every visit that he has to drink and eat a lot of dairy for strong bones? Is she getting paid by the dairy industry to say that? Jade, maybe I'll pass it to you first, and then we'll go to Verena to see if she has anything more to add.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important enough that both of us should answer, because we do get this question so commonly. And you know what? There is a lot of controversy that is surrounding whether milk does provide strong bones or whether it perhaps weakens them. So in case you aren't aware, there is some research out there that shows that milk can actually weaken bones because the protein in an animal product in particular can be acidic. And so then your bone needs to leach some of the basic. So then what it does is it buffers the acid, and then that can cause brittle bones. Now there's research to refute that. And then there's research that neutralizes and says that it doesn't matter how much milk you drink, it's not going to actually give you strong bones. So the way I pose this isn't so much about whether or not milk is going to give you strong bones or cause osteoporosis. It's that there's actually better sources of calcium out there, and they're in plants. So I tend to tell people, really, like, again, back to eating a well-rounded whole food plant-based diet, you can actually get a good amount of calcium. And so one of those main sources is leafy greens. Now, if we're going to get technical, there's high oxalate and low oxalate leafy greens. And the ones that are high oxalate, like spinach, you don't absorb as much calcium. So this is a little plug for kale. And no, I'm not funded by the kale industry. There's no kale industry, but kale is low oxalate. And actually, and if you do head to head of how much calcium you can actually absorb from something like kale or bok choy, yes, cauliflower, cabbage, endive, whatever, you actually get more calcium uptake from something like kale than you do from dairy. So it's a more efficient source of calcium. If you're looking for other things, seeds, poppy, chia, and sesame seeds are great sources. If you eat beans or lentils every day, that's great. Almonds, rhubarb is one, which is a weed, and most of us know how easy it can be to grow, especially those of us who grew up with Ukrainian grandmas like I did. So anyway, the way I pose it is just simply like, are there better alternative sources? And those plants are not coupled with stuff like saturated fat and, links to heart disease and diabetes and potentially with cancers.
Yeah, and then I think maybe I can speak to the second part of the question. So why do physicians or doctors keep recommending a high intake for milk, particularly for children and adolescents? And it's just speaking from experience, and I'm sure Jade will agree. We both went through medical training, and if we hadn't sought out nutritional training, in particular through I almost want to say extracurricular activities, we would have never received it. It's not part, or it's not a significant part of medical training. So physicians repeat what we all heard when we grew up, right? It's like milk has lots of calcium, which gives you strong bones. You need that to grow and so on. So that's what they repeat, but they don't spend usually any time keeping up on newer research. And a lot of these things, stem shockingly from, the 30s, 40s, 50s, where just our diet was really poor in variety. We didn't have that many vegetables available to us. So one of the main sources of calcium that we had at all was milk. And that's, kind of like the wisdom that is still being passed on without any critical question behind that. And I can imagine, actually, I know from personal experience, it is so hard to go against that when you have a doctor's appointment, you have someone who you think is an expert tell you you're doing it wrong. So my advice is, if you can, try to find a nutritionally informed and educated physician, but there's not many of them out there, sadly, not yet.
Yeah. To give you some hope and for context, the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine exam that I just completed in November actually had 1,300 different professionals write it, a huge amount of physicians from Canada and the United States. So if you ever hear a buzzword about a physician who's interested in lifestyle medicine, this is the type of knowledge that they do acquire. So it's really great to seek them out. And they tend to specialize in discussing these sort of things in chronic disease. One thing I wanted to address in the chat is somebody said something about could you lose calcium uptake from leafy greens when you cook them? And the answer is yes, you can. But if you just simply steam them lightly, just a quick one to kind of soften them, and they get a bit greener, that's actually not going to cause a lot of nutrient loss, and you can get actually more bang for your buck. Like, the greener your greens are when you eat them, the better, long and short.
Great, thank you. And I see people are dropping in the chat other ways that they get calcium through different plant food, which is fun to see. Real quick, I just saw Lucy asked, if you put vegetables in a broth, does the calcium remain?
As far as I know, and I'm not 100% on this, but usually there's a degrading of nutrients that happens if things are cooked for too long. And so, yes, some nutrients can leach into liquids when you're cooking in them, but there's also a degradation, a breaking down that can happen. So I liked somebody's suggestion about putting it in smoothies. You can also marinate kale and make it soft for a nice salad. And you can lightly steam them so that it's, 'cause stuff like kale can be pretty tough, fibrous, right?
So before we leave the original question, or part of the original question, which was, communicating with your physician, Jade, as a practicing physician yourself, I'm wondering, I don't know, what advice might you have for all the people on the call, or anyone who might be watching it later, who possibly have these same maybe frustrating conversations with their physician about, being told that they should be eating something or drinking something? I don't know, what's the best way to navigate a possible, I'm not saying, you're going to have an hour to sit there and talk to your doctor, but are there any things that you can use as a starting point to have a conversation with your physician if the opportunity presents itself?
I'm glad that you ask. One of the best resources to go to is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I think Maya had put a link to that previously. PCRM. It was founded by Dr. Neil Barnard. And in fact, if you want more information above what we give in this talk today, you can actually search Dr. Neil Barnard Dairy, and he has some beautiful talks. Some of them are an hour long from different conferences he's been at. And I think that what you can do is gently approach your physician with, you know, I respect what you're saying. However, here is a couple resources that I have found of credible physicians who specialize in this area, who have provided the following information. And so I'm going to use the following foods, you know, as my intake for calcium, and we can follow up if it's a concern. But I think it's amazing how many physicians I know whose patients are actually the ones that led them to seek out different knowledge and to challenge their worldview. And like Verena said, we just simply do not get any education on nutrition in medical training.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. So the next question I would like to move us to is, are there any regulations defining how to manage antibiotics and hormones in the production of milk products? So I don't know, Verena, is that something you are able to speak to?
I can take a stab at it. Unfortunately, the first thing I will say is it depends on where you live. I'm assuming that most of our audience is based in the United States, and sadly, I have to say the consumer is not often the main, or the health of the consumer is not often the main interest of regulatory bodies. Particularly of the USDA, which has a major conflict of interest when it comes to their constituency, which is usually the agricultural industry, and yet they're giving out guidelines like the food guidelines to advise consumers on healthy behavior, and the same is true for regulations around antibiotics and hormones. So there's practices still allowed in the US that have long been banned in the EU, for instance, the use of bovine growth hormones to make milk production more efficient in dairy cows, or the just default use of antibiotics for the entire herd in terms of preventing disease and also increasing growth in cows, rather than using it specifically to treat disease, which goes along with an increasing and very significant problem of antibiotic resistance across species, not just in animals. So short answer, if you assume that these regulations are not in the interest of the health of the consumer, then you're probably right.
I would love to add two things to that. So one is just to circle back to, and Verena, I always love your answers because you know so much. One of the things is just to circle back to the whole process I said about, so where does dairy come from in the first place? It's breast milk for growing calves. And so again, even if the animals are not receiving extra hormone, you have to remember that if a pregnant cow is producing milk, there's natural hormone. And so don't be fooled by the gimmicks. There will be labels on things that say like no exogenous hormone or no artificial hormone or added hormone. They're still hormone. Second of all, please remember that, so antibiotics, whether you knew this or not, they're not just used to fight disease in the animals. For some animals, and this is an aside from dairy, but just for some animals bred for meat, antibiotics are actually used to help them grow big and fast. And so again, it's being used inappropriately, and it's unfortunately a dangerous exposure for all of us.
Great, thank you. And I am going to call on an FFAC staff member, anyone, if you would be able to pull up our factory farming cesspool video and drop that in the chat. We had a question that got submitted in advance about what happens to the farmed animal waste. So I'm not going to pose that question to Jade and Verena, but if someone on staff could drop the link to that video. It's about a 5-minute video, so maybe anyone on the call can just open it up in a tab and watch it later, but that will help you understand what happens to the farmed animal waste. Thanks, Monica. Okay, so I think I'm getting close to our questions that have been submitted in advance. It looks like I have one or two left. And the next question is a very general question, and that is milk healthy for the human body? Jade, do you have any comments on that?
Um, I kind of giggled to myself because I can't believe I didn't know this until 3 years ago, and I can't believe that society has kind of living in this fantasy where this industry profits. But no, despite any little tidbit or shred of evidence in the scientific literature that may say something like, yogurt might be anti-inflammatory, or there's calcium in dairy, or there's protein, there is always a plant-based alternative, a whole food plant-based alternative that is superior with less risk. And so that whole milk does a body good campaign, to me, unfortunately, is a crock. And the biggest positives that I've seen in patients is when they ditch dairy above any other change in their diet. People with irritable bowel, people with acne, people with asthma, allergies, unknown skin rashes, the PCRM, the Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, just had a wonderful campaign about breast cancer for Breast Cancer Month, and the focus was really on the fact that the evidence is really compounding and piling up, that dairy is just something that if you remove it, you will lead a healthier life. So that's a long answer to say no.
And a testament to that, by the way, is if you compare the current US dietary guidelines with the current Canadian dietary guidelines, you will realize that Canada took off dairy as a necessary food group from the most up-to-date recommendations. And just a little anecdote on why that happened. This was actually the first time in the history of the nation that these guidelines were first and foremost produced based on scientific evidence, and that particularly the representatives of the dairy industry did not meet behind closed doors with policymakers. And you see that impact immediately reflected in the updated guidelines in that dairy has been taken off the plate.
Verena, you read my mind. I was going to ask you both next to talk about, just how things are in Canada with the guidelines. So you talked about that. Actually, I don't know that we mentioned this yet, that you're both in Canada. Is there anything that you could share, either of you, about any observations you have of how people view dairy in Canada versus in the US? Is it pretty much the same? Is it starting to shift a bit more in Canada with the new guidelines? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously we all live in our bubbles, right? So I'm going to let Jade talk more about what her patients, for instance, say. But I do want to highlight that, interestingly enough, that the dairy industry is heavily entrenched in Canadian culture, right? A lot of Canadians really identify with, farming and agriculture, and particularly dairy. And dairy is a very strong industry, a very strong lobby in Canada. Hence the significantly higher milk prices in Canada. Lots of Canadians actually travel across the border, or used to pre-COVID, to buy milk in the US because it's cheaper. So, I would say that it's probably viewed the same. And rest assured, the guidelines were not put out without any, pressure from the industry, and yet I guess science prevailed in the end. I do know from my research bubble, and people in that area are embracing the fact that dairy is really not a necessary or healthy food group. But even there, it's taking a while because people are just cling on to old ideas.
From a clinical standpoint, I have to say the change in the culture in medicine, and even in advocating for people to use Canada's food guide or to look at it, is slow as molasses. I am absolutely floored that more people aren't getting on board. The amount of patients who are referred to. So I'm part of a lifestyle medicine clinic in Canada. We have 35 physicians right now who are servicing the entire province of BC. We're hoping to expand. We've expanded a bit into Ontario. And so people get referred to us, and the vast majority have never had a conversation with their family doctor about the food guide. It's not brought up, it's not made available in clinics yet. Public health, I thought, did a really good job with the campaign. So unfortunately, I think North America as a whole, we're all kind of in the same boat. What I am seeing though, and what I'm excited about, especially looking at all of you here, is the younger generation is wanting to know more about their health, about nutrition, about planetary health, and making that connection. And so that's what's exciting, because I don't think this change is necessarily going to come from the medical world. I think it's going to come from the youth and those who aren't afraid to educate their family docs and doctors that they see. So that's why I'm a strong advocate for bring a little bit of research to them, make a little plug. Maybe you're the one who opens their eyes.
And I think you can see that change slowly but surely by the increasing amount of litigation and cases that are brought in front of juries in terms of dairy industry trying to change labeling of plant milk. So there's a new EU law that was just passed, I think, 2 weeks ago, that now forbids plant-based milks to use the word milk. And that's really a sign that the dairy industry is starting to feel quite threatened and is starting to, really get out the big guns and trying to undermine this really growing new industry that is becoming threatening to them.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to move us to the topic of lactose intolerance. Jade, could you speak to the question of is it normal to be lactose intolerant, or why are some people lactose intolerant and others are not?
Okay, so I always have to pause and make sure that I don't give you the history of humankind when I go into this answer. But so if you think about it, before we domesticated and utilized cows for their milk or goats, a child would be born. There was no formula back then, so they would be breastfed, and they had the ability to digest lactose until roughly around age 4. If you want more information, we can pop a link for Dr. Jackie Busey in the chat. She's a wonderful pediatrician with a lot of information. And so after that, then that ability to digest it would peter off. But humans became smart, and we figured out that we could keep enjoying milk and it didn't have to be from our own species. And wow, cow's milk is not too bad and it's kind of tasty. And then we figured out cheese, and we were all totally hooped because cheese, everybody gets addicted to cheese. And there's some truth to that, and that's a side note. So anyway, so the estimates on population studies now kind of go as generous as to say like 70% of the human population is lactose intolerant because of this natural inability after age 4 roughly to digest milk. And the interesting thing is actually the population who can most tolerate dairy and lactose are Caucasians, and those who are not Caucasian have a higher incidence of lactose intolerance. And there have actually been lots of discussions about whether the portrayal of necessity of having dairy in your diet is actually racist in its delivery, because it's not something that everybody can tolerate. And if you look at the statistics, that is something that is being pushed more so because it's tolerant more so by Caucasians. So really, if you think about it, yeah, we weren't meant to have the milk of another being and from our own being, not after we were children.
Yeah, can I just chip in, because I think it's such an important issue, and to me really increasingly one of racial justice, because as the market in predominantly Caucasian cultures is slowly drying up, there's a lot of industry push for particularly milk to be consumed in markets of the global south, where the majority of the people really is lactose intolerant, we're talking, I think almost 90% of Asians, over 70% of African Americans are lactose intolerant. And yet those are the markets where these products are being pushed quite aggressively over the last few years.
Great, thank you. And I love what Rowdy commented in the chat. A couple weeks ago, we had a whole conversation about this with some of our students about how this concept of lactose normal, that actually, it's normal to not be able to digest lactose. So helping change our language around that and just the way we think about it. Jade, it was your turn to read my mind, since Verena had already done it a few minutes ago, because the next question I was going to ask is related to the comments that we have all heard, or we've maybe said it ourselves, which is, but I am addicted to cheese, so there is no possible way that I could ever stop eating it. So Jade, do you mind speaking just briefly, or maybe just talking about Dr. Barnard's research on this notion that we might actually be?
Yep. So this is the thing that hit home. I am a reformed, eat a whole cheese board addict, spinach dip at every restaurant. Where's my fettuccine Alfredo? So I read the book, The Cheese Trap. And again, I was like, how do we not know this? So cheese takes everything from milk and it just concentrates it down, right? Including the saturated fat, but it also concentrates down casein. And so like casein protein has something called casomorphin in it. So the name morphin kind of sounds like morphone, like morphine. What is it? Well, it's actually a mild opiate, and it can have this mild effect on the same receptors in the pleasure center as in your brain as opiates. So it can have the same effect to a milder state as heroin. And so it does have a potential for addiction. And so it kind of makes sense, again, if I'm going to go back to that evolutionary basis, because I'm fascinated with who we were and who we are now and how we evolved. And so of course it would, because when children are breastfeeding, you want to make sure that they want to breastfeed in order for survival. They need that for survival. And so you have lots of this casomorphone in it, even just small amounts. It's that milk drunk look that little babies get when they're breastfeeding, right? And then they kind of pass out. It's that feel good. It's not just that bond with the mom, the maternal bond. It's an evolutionary thing for survival. And so then you concentrate it down and you put it in a brick loaded with saturated fat, and we color it orange because it's not meant to be orange. And then most of us are like, yeah, okay, like now. So when you realize and make that connection too, it kind of makes it easier to go like, I feel like I've been duped a little bit, and to be able to break that bond. And so when you say it, there's some truth to it. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think Maya might have linked to this book earlier at the very beginning of the chat, The Cheese Trap. Yeah, she did. I really enjoyed that book, so I'd highly recommend it if you're someone who is interested in learning more about the science behind the reasons why we do feel addicted to cheese. I want to cover one more topic, and that is asthma. So I'm wondering, Jade, probably this would go to you. Is there anything that you can speak to about the connection between dairy consumption and excess mucus or breathing issues, asthma, anything like that?
Yeah, so this is one area where I know that there is a link, but I cannot explain the nitty-gritty, and that's just from lack of time to be able to do some research. But what I can say is that there's a triad of things that are interconnected. And so there's asthma, and there's seasonal allergies, and there's rashes like eczema. So that it's that ectopic triangle. And so what we have found in studies is that children who move away from dairy not only have improvement of asthma, but also of their eczema. And so Verena may know a little bit more about it. I might check one resource to actually look for the study. I think Dr. Neil Barnard goes into this in detail when he's talking not only in his this lecture, but in the cheese trap. And the other resource that I would suggest you look towards is Dr. Michael Clapper, Klaper, and we might be able to put a link for him and his website. He has some talks about dairy and dairy myths as well. Whenever I feel like I'm kind of stumped and I just go, yeah, there's a connection, and I don't really have a good resource to back it up, I look to some of these people who have been in this world and talking about this for like 30, 40 years.
Okay, so there is one more question that was submitted that I passed over in the moment since it wasn't dairy related, but we do have a couple minutes now, and I've gotten through all of the questions. So I will ask it, and that was the question about B vitamins. So Jade or Verena, would either of you like to speak to vitamin B12 or general B vitamins?
I think I'll leave that up to Jade, although I do love talking about vitamin B12.
I know. I think we're both equipped to answer it at this point. Okay, so if we're going to talk about plant-based diets, vegan, call it what you will, there's one nutrient in particular that you do need to make sure you get, and it is B12. And I recommend 1,000 micrograms just 3 times a week, unless you're somebody who has really low levels. Why is this? So most people associate B12 with red meat. B12 actually comes from the soil, from bacteria in the soil. And so back in the day when cows would be on the pasture more often and we had really good soil quality with diversity, they would eat grass, get some of the soil in, and they would ingest B12. And so then when you would eat a cow, you would just get B12 from their flesh, but really they're the middleman. And so most of us don't like big organizational structures and talk about cutting out the middleman anyway. Well, the animal's the middle person. And the thing is, we used to get it from vegetables as well, but now we're more sanitary, and that's probably a good thing. And it is a good thing. And so we don't get B12 from dirt that's on our carrots anymore. Now, the other thing to know is that B12, because it's not, our soil quality isn't as good, cows often are in feedlots, for example, most animals are actually supplemented with B12. So again, there's a middleman, woman, because here you could just take the B12 supplement yourself and cut out the middle thing. And so B12, yes. And if I'm going to go down this rabbit hole, then I'm also going to say, if you are somebody who is looking to gravitate towards whole food plant-based or plant predominant, or you're already there, please make sure that you're cognizant of your omega-3s, and you can take an algae-based supplement. Fish oil supplements tend to be covered with, they have mercury, toxins, pesticides, whatnot. So you might as well get an algae-grown one a couple days a week. You can also eat lots of chia, flax, and hemp, and walnuts, but those are 2 main things. And lastly, most of the North American, the Northern Hemisphere population should be having vitamin D. So if I'm going to get on the health thing, where we were mentioning calcium, vitamin D is something that's crucial for absorption. We can't get enough sunlight. So, 1 to 2,000 units, 2,000 usually in the winter months a day. That's my supplement dance that I always do. Do you need a bunch of other stuff? No.
Great. Thank you, Jade. And if you were here at the very start of the webinar, I said that never in any of our nutrition webinars have Jade, Verena, and I been able to get through all of the questions. So there was no way we were going to be able to get through all of the questions tonight. I guess all I needed to do was say that, because I said it and we got through all of the questions. So this is a first for us, which is very exciting. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions in advance, and for all of the communication in the chat. I did want to allow about a minute here for Jade and Verena both, I don't know, just to end, like, is there anything else maybe that we didn't cover, or that you just would want people to know related to dairy, questions that you have gotten asked before that weren't raised during our time together, just kind of as a final word to the participants?
I think I just like my little blurb to those of us who are, on the journey towards being dairy free. My number one tip, having gone through it myself, just be kind to yourself, and you know, it's a stepwise process for many of us, and seek comfort in people who are on this journey with you, and surround yourself with people who, you know, are maybe already there, just to be reinforced that you're on the right track.
Yeah, I love that we managed to get that into every talk because it is so important. And we are, although increasing in numbers and the world is getting more informed and waking up a bit more to what's going to impact our health in a positive way, and also planetary and animal health and welfare, yeah, it can feel really lonely. And the other thing too is that for some people, they just go full throttle, you know, like omnivore to vegan or completely dairy free. The thing that's most accessible to a lot of people is SMART goals. And so I can't sit here and individually coach anybody, but what I can say is Google SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive. And if you're somebody who's thinking, I am ready, you're not pre-contemplative, you're ready, your preparation stage, you're ready to make an action plan, you can say like, okay, wow, I just took stock of what I ate last week, and I eat cheese 3 times a day. So maybe next week I'm going to try eating it just 2 times a day. I'm going to see how I feel, set myself up for success, create a support system, and then I'm going to go to 1 times a day and then half that portion and whatnot. So you can make just specific little goals. The other thing too is, you know, social media can be really powerful to build up different resources for recipes, to build up a community. I know it feels artificial. We're all on Zoom and I'd love to meet everybody in person, but yeah, like Verena said, finding your people. And lastly, you know, if you're still scared to ditch it, and you're worried about what your health is going to be like, and are you going to be missing stuff despite what we say, I want you to know that this little gem of a human has never had dairy, and she's doing okay. And as a physician, I would never put my daughter in harm's way. And many of us have plant-based children, or we have seen people who have been plant-based for like 30 plus years. And I want you to know that they're thriving. It's possible. The food doesn't have to be boring, and it also doesn't have to be expensive. So I'm just really excited that all of you have joined in. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful conclusion. We have to cut it there. Rowdy, I'm going to pass it back to you to wrap everything up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Verena. Thank you, Jade. Your expertise is so valuable. We appreciate you clearing up all the misinformation on this topic. This is an environmental issue, a social justice issue, an ethical issue, and most certainly a nutritional issue. As a reminder, we will be sending out an email to everyone that attended today with a recording and some other helpful resources. To close it out, we do have one more poll question for everyone. Please let us know if you're feeling more inspired after today's discussion. We'll launch that poll right now. Are you definitely feeling inspired, considering it, and maybe you still have some questions? And there are places on our website that you can submit those questions that we didn't get to, that came in at the end. A big thank you to everyone who donated when you registered. We cannot do this kind of work without you. We are an educational nonprofit, and we are made entirely possible by the generosity of our supporters. With your help, we are empowering future leaders, and they are going to change the world. I've met them. They're doing incredible work. So please consider making a donation now if you haven't, by using the link in the chat box. It means a lot to us. This was the last webinar until spring. We are formulating the spring webinar schedule right now, and we would love to hear from you. We are interested in your input. What do you want to see covered in future webinars? So please get in touch with us and let us know what would be useful for you. I also want to take just one more minute to invite you to our end of year celebration. We got the one and only Earthling Ed, who's coming to our event, which is so cool. He's going to answer your questions. And the FFAC founder, Katie Cantrell, who some of you might know, she will also be in attendance. We're going to have a really fun auction. It's going to be really fun and a great way to build community and celebrate with each other. We also have a volunteer happy half hour coming up where we get together and talk about some tangible actions to make a difference. All of this is on our website. We have a book club that's really gaining steam and becoming a cool group of people. It's called Culture Shift. They're reading the lives of animals. For more information about scheduling a presentation, getting involved, go to our website. We also have a very new veg support program. There are often so many questions when eating or including more plant-based foods. We'll help you with what to eat, what to buy, favorite products, recipes, yada, yada, yada. All right, we can't thank you enough, friends. Thank you so much. This was great. Such a wonderful finale to our webinar series. And we'll see you around. Stay safe out there.